Dello heavy-duty engine oils. Proven engine protection at prices you can rely on, giving you even more reasons to choose Dello. Today, we're here to talk about one of my absolute favorite machines in the industry. We're here to talk about track loaders. Joining us from Caterpillar today is Sam Meeker, and he's going to give us a rundown of Caterpillar's lineup. For those of our audience that aren't familiar with Caterpillar's track loader lineup, can you give us an overview of what models you offer and kind of what differentiates those?
Yeah, you bet. So the track loader lineup today consists of that 953, that 963, and 973. So if we're taking a look at the models and size classes, you're looking at 160 horse, 200 horse, and 275. Or if you want to look at weights, you're in 45,000 pound, 55,000 pound, and 70,000 pound, roughly in those weights.
Okay. And then what kind of yardages are you getting out of those buckets on those machines? Because that's one of the big advantages of track loaders is they just move a monstrous amount of dirt.
Yeah, absolutely. So when, on that smaller one, that 953, you're anywhere in that 2.5, up to 2 3/4 yard. When you get into that 63, now you're in that 3.5, 3/4 yard. And then that 73, it's 4 up into the 5.0 yard. And those are just the dirt buckets, right? Like our performance series bucket's going to be a little bit larger than a general purpose bucket. And of course, you've got the multi-purpose bucket, that clamshell 4-in-1, where you can use that for other applications, picking up materials and things like that. And not even talking about waste or wood chip buckets. Those get even really large when you get that waste with that big trash rack on the top. Now you're pushing 6.5, 7 yards or so with that big track loader.
Wow. So for people who aren't familiar, because I know in our neck of the woods up here in kind of like the northern part of the Midwest, you don't see a lot of track loaders. What are some of the advantages that track loaders bring to the table over some of your more traditionally seen pieces of equipment?
Yeah, the funny thing, just, quick history lesson about track loaders. Back in the old days, in the 20s and 30s, there were companies that would make an aftermarket loader device that would fit onto a bulldozer. And one in particular was the Traxxon company. And they would make basically a loader that was cable operated that would fit on top of a dozer. And that cable operated eventually became a hydraulic operated tractor with a loader on it. And then eventually we purchased the Traxxon company and started to build that loader onto that bulldozer. So fast forward a few years, and a lot of generations of what we would call front engine track loaders, where it looked like a bulldozer with a loader arm on the front of it. Of course, a lot of refinements in there to make that tractor do what we wanted it to do. Then, kind of getting into the 80s and into the 90s, we started to develop that rear engine track loader, where we put that engine in the back, right? It cleared up all of that visibility in the front end of that tractor, and it allowed that operator to do that loading and dozing and grading and sorting work with a lot better visibility and a lot better balanced machine. So, as we get out there today and we start talking about these machines, I kind of like to refer to them as just a great big skid steer, right? I mean, what's the tractor that everybody runs when they first get on the job site? When you first put down the shovel, what tractor are you grabbing a hold of? What are they putting you in? It's the skid steer. Right?
It's the skid steer.
You betcha. So kind of taking that same methodology, that track loader is just a great big skid steer, a great big CTL. It's got that loading capability. It's got enough mass and enough tractive effort that you can do dozing with it, right? It's got the maneuverability that you can get around on tight job sites. You can load trucks with it. They're tall enough that you can get that bucket into trucks. And so you're 3-pass, 4-pass, 5-pass and into an on-highway truck and get that material on the road. And, they can kind of just do a little bit of everything. They're that jack of all trades, first on the job site, last to leave type of machine.
Another advantage you didn't really talk about, though, is ground pressure. Can you talk a little bit about that compared to like its wheeled counterpart? I mean, you're talking substantially less ground pressure.
We've always said that a wheeled machine is, whatever PSI you have in the tires is typically what that ground pressure is. So, if you've got 30, 40 PSI in that wheel loader tires, that's your ground pressure of that machine, right? On a standard gauge and narrow track loader, you're anywhere between that 7 and 9 PSI. Maybe 10 PSI on the high end. When you get into the LGP or what we call the wide gauge track loader, those are even getting down into that 6 range of ground pressure. So wow. You can really get that tractor out there a little bit earlier after the rain, right, onto that little bit softer ground to kind of clear things out and help the rest of the job site get started. Even later in the season when you have those frosts that tend to soften things up, you can still get that track loader out there carrying materials to the excavator, helping do that little bit of land clearing, clearing that slop out of the way, and even carrying some of that material back and loading trucks on the good underfoot conditions so that you can keep that machine moving and keep the whole job site working.
I will say that's one of the areas where I've really seen track loaders excel is on the ground clearing aspect. Watching someone, a skilled operator that knows what they're doing, going in there with a track loader, it is incredible how fast they can clear property of all the vegetation.
Yeah, track loader is one of those unique machines that it's got enough capacity in the front end to be able to really put the pressure on and do that land clearing work. So, for example, even on like a 953, your lifting capability of a 953 is close to 20,000 pounds.
Wow.
Right? So you want to talk about clearing out a lot, of some old growth trees and whatnot. Bump them over, pick up the root ball and flick it out. And you can do that so quickly with a 953, 963 track loader. It's pretty amazing. It's a lot of our business kind of in the eastern side of the U.S. and that whole Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania world is that they're able to do a lot of different work with this tractor. And it includes the beginning of a site, right? That land clearing, building that road to get the materials up to where they're going to build the house or, build the church or whatever it is they're working on there. And then even kind of grading that road out, carrying some stone in there and really even finishing that stuff up. So it's such a versatile machine because it can do so many different things. Like you said, from that land clearing all the way down to that finish work and doing that last little bit of backfilling around the basements, putting it all back together and sending it back to the developer and the customer.
So there's something else that I want to touch on. It has always astonished me at how frequently, especially in kind of the central part of the country, you see these machines being used to dig basements. Can you talk about why these are successful at digging basements and what sets them apart from going at this with an excavator? But before we get into that, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Chevron Lubricants.
These cranes work around the clock for months at a time. If one of these engines ever goes down, it costs more than our reputation. Switching to Delos 600 ADF, it's been a game changer. We've had no issues with clogged DPFs. No regen lights, no cleaning, no replacements, nothing. This oil goes beyond anything we've ever used. I choose proven protection that keeps our cranes on the job. I choose Delos 600 ADF.
Can you talk about why these are successful at digging basements and what sets them apart from going at this with an excavator?
Yeah, good point. And, in the Midwest, that whole Illinois, Missouri, even into Indiana, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska area, they've been that traditional tractor that has gone out and done that basement work, right? I think a lot of it is, contractor can haul this out on a tag trailer, drop it off there. It's one machine. They can get in, dig that basement, get that flat floor and those vertical walls. They can kind of do that, cut the ramp in, of course, to get in and out and do that basement. But they can kind of do that from anywhere. They don't have to think about where they're going to position and where their piles are going to be because they're able to take that material and pile it wherever they want to as they work their way in and out of that basement. So we see a lot of folks, they do a couple of things, right? You're only going to need a certain amount of material to backfill with. So they're able to strategically place that backfill material around that job site, around that house site, so they can put it where they want it. And then the rest of that excess material, which is probably 80% of a basement, right? Maybe 90 even. They're able to take that, spread that out in that backyard, grade it out, compact it in where they want, and they can kind of create that whole backyard and that whole site, all the drainage that they want away from the house. They can get all that set up with this one machine. And it always used to be a lot of basements, in the Midwest were kind of that one-day work. So, customer comes in the morning, drops the thing off the trailer, gets that basement dug. At the end of the day, good long day, he's able to load that back up and head off to the next job again tomorrow. He's not taking two trucks and trailers in, skid steer and excavator, both of them to get the work done. He's able to get it done with one machine. And again, nice clean walls on the side. That's what the concrete guys want. They don't want things flaking off. They want nice clean walls. They're able to get that and get it nice and clean and have that whole job site ready to go and ready to finish footings and pour concrete the next day, right?
Yeah, interesting. So my final question for you is one of the big negatives of the track loader. Can you talk about undercarriage costs. And is that something that customers should shy away from these machines because it is a known expensive piece?
It is an expensive piece for sure. I would say when we take a look at the overall cost of a track loader and even a dozer in general, right? Undercarriage cost is going to be in that $6 or $7 up to maybe even $10 or $12 an hour. So it is a cost that you have to accumulate for and you have to understand. But I'm not so sure it's that far off of tires, especially if you're in underfoot conditions where you might be doing a little bit of slip with your tires, maybe a little bit, those hidden rocks here and there. That's really what kills tires, right? Is the rocks in the underfoot there. So the ability to have that undercarriage, know what your cost is going to be, have a reasonable idea what it's going to be. But, look, if you're in that, $8, $10 an hour range for undercarriage, it's surprising, honestly, how long a steel rotating undercarriage actually lasts. We get a lot of customers 5,000, 6,000 hours into it are still running on that undercarriage. Roll a new undercarriage on there, put that investment into it, and go ahead and get that next batch of 6,000, 8,000 hours maybe out of it, whatever it is in the area that you're in. But undercarriage for sure is part of the cost, but we got to remember tires are part of the cost too. I wouldn't purport to know how long tires are going to last and how much they cost in a machine, but it's probably not a heck of a lot off of that $6 an hour range. So if you're able to get in a little bit early, do a little bit more of that work on the job site, I think that the extra couple bucks an hour is worth it for that undercarriage on that track loader.
Well, I was going to say, it's always struck me as the guys that complain the loudest about that are generally the guys who aren't doing a good job of really accounting for that expense down the road. It's when they all of a sudden have to go and finally take it in and they get hit with that big bill and they just go, what? And it's like, well, this is not an unknown cost. This is something that had you accounted for it and planned for it, not that big of a deal. But like you said, when you compare it to wheels overall, I bet you're in the ballpark. But when you go in for a tire versus an entire undercarriage replacement, I think that's where it really hits guys in the gut. And it's just because you're getting that cost all at the same time and they haven't necessarily planned for it. But then you look at the capabilities of the machine versus its wheeled counterpart and you go, well, look at the advantages you're getting in the capabilities of the machine.
Yeah. That extra day on the front end of a job site or that extra day into the rain on the back end of it, it definitely pays for you. Now, and keep in mind too, right? Our dealers have a great system that they use to monitor undercarriage and estimate life on undercarriage. So that's certainly something that, take advantage of, right? If you're a customer working with your local dealer, take advantage of that undercarriage inspection service that our dealers provide. I've seen a lot of these reports come out and that you've got 50% left on this component and 60% on that component. We try to keep things, fairly consistent in terms of life, but it is definitely a planned repair, right? It's not something that typically sneaks up on you. Again, like cutting a tire, it sneaks up on you and all of a sudden you need one today. This is something that you can plan out. And honestly, most customers are going to get it in the downtime. They're going to get it in those winter months that they got a little extra time to be able to get that work done and replace that. But, track loaders, they don't burn a heck of a lot of fuel, right? We've got a lot of these machines out there, 5360 theory, that are in that, 4, 5, 6 gallon an hour range. That's pretty miserly in terms of fuel. Easy to run, right? We've done a lot of work in terms of the cabs to make these machines easy to run. We've got the traditional V-lever and foot steering if you want that, but we also have a joystick, literally just like a skid steer. So, forward, reverse, left and right. Change the steering pattern. If you want it to run like a crawler, you could choose crawler pattern. If you want it to run like a skid steer, you could choose skid steer pattern. And then on the right-hand side, your joystick with the, with the third function on that. So if you've got, a rollout bucket, or if you've got, say, an MP bucket, a 4-in-1 clamshell, you run that thing just like you would your bucket on your skid steer. So they really are a unique tractor in the fact that it's easy to run, but it also has this massive capability for dozing and cutting and grading and, picking up those materials. It's pretty impressive where the types of situations we see these track loaders in, the type of applications too. It's pretty interesting.
I will say that's why it's one of my favorite machines on the job, is because consistently when I watch one, you just walk away going, man, it doesn't matter what size, whether it's a 50, 360, 373, that thing's a freaking beast. It's just a beast.
Yep, for sure. We sell these in a lot of different applications, of course. earth moving. You'll see that in there. You mentioned residential with basement work. We see them a lot in sewer and water pipe, right? So we're assisting that excavator. We're carrying the stone boat around, with the forks. We're carrying pipe and stringing it out on the job site, as those trucks come in. We're carrying stone to the boat so that excavator can keep working. So kind of in that utility space, helping them out. You mentioned land clearing. That's a big application for us as well, too. But some of the fun ones that I get to be involved in, waste handling in particular. I love seeing track loaders on a waste site, right? And it might be a production pusher where, if you've got a smaller site with a bunch of roll-offs in there, a bunch of 10-ton loads that are getting dumped out, they're using that track loader to push that material down, spread it, and get it ready for the compactor. But I see a lot of them as kind of on job sites, on landfills, where they have a specific site and they want that track loader to go over and do that specific work. Maybe it's a recycling area where they're pulling some metal out. Maybe it's a special site like an asbestos site where they have to have it completely separate. And the track loader is able to effectively excavate, spread, compact, and then cover all with that same machine. They're able to do all of that work on that specific site by themselves.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of little landfills that have them as kind of either as a primary machine or even larger landfills that use them as a very site-specific machine.
Interesting. Super versatile. That's awesome. Well, Sam, thank you so much for the time and all of the information on these machines. It's fantastic. Well, thank you again for Sam taking the time to take us through the lineup of Caterpillar track loaders and just all of the different uses and versatile functions this machine can cover. There's a reason this is one of my favorite machines in the industry. So as always, I hope this helps you in your business. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Dirt.